Welcome back to the Own It podcast. I'm very excited for today's episode. I've got Luke Banitsiotis on, Australasia Auctioneer of the Year, you were saying, and 3-time Senior Victorian Auctioneer of the Year. Have I got that right? Welcome. How are you, mate?
Yeah, very well. Yourself?
Good. Thanks for coming on.
This is nice. We only saw each other like 48 hours ago at an auction. So
it was
really
good.
Timely.
It was timely because obviously have Luke on today to discuss all things auctions. And I thought I should get someone who is very well versed in auctions and how they work, and no better than someone who is a very good auctioneer. And I would say you're one of the best I've seen,
thank you.
If not the best, because maybe another auctioneer will listen to this. But today's sort of episode is to help buyers. We're going to break this into 2 parts, but sort of break it down for buyers on how auctions work, because a lot of buyers are really daunted, really overwhelmed by it. There's just so much happening, and it's like it's not really that scary, but easy for sort of us to say, easy for you to say. It's called a lot of auctions, but let's just sort of break it down to the basics and sort of go through it. Like probably the best question is like, what is an auction? Like, what even is it? Like, how does the day work? What's it look like? I mean, obviously you called the auction, but like, how's the day start for the vendors? What should the buyers do? Is there an open? Like, sort of just break it down to basics. Like, what is an auction?
In my opinion, an auction is the most transparent way to determine the value of any product. You know, so things like fine wine, art, jewelry, all those sorts of pieces will go through the auction process. And it's no different with selling a house here in Melbourne or any other state in Australia, because I know that you do get some reach, not just in Melbourne. So,
am I blushing now?
You are blushing. Yes, you've gone TikTok famous.
Oh, I'm not sure about that.
But no, in its simplest form, an auction is just a transparent method for selling sales. So it's open to both the vendor and the buyer. Everyone can see market value in front of them, and if everyone can agree on the price, we transact in its most simplest terms.
Well, it's also good because before we started recording this as well, we were talking about an auction, the one I saw you at 48 hours ago. And we thought like that was a pretty emotional price. With real estate, there's not a recommended selling price.
No.
And so if we were to logically talk about it, it's like we would think this, but you sort of have to give buyers their day to determine value, because they might put a higher price on it, which obviously the auction that I went to that you called, both those buyers did. So what's your role in the process then as sort of the auctioneer? I mean, obviously it's to facilitate the process, but like how does that work for you on your side of things?
Like you just said, obviously number one is to facilitate the process from start to finish. Our role in Melbourne's a little bit different to across the country, where agents and auctioneers generally. So I have a real hands-on approach with the vendors leading up to auction day. But then on the day, it's mainly to ensure that the process is conducted legally. We follow the schedules that we need to, that are implemented by the government with legislation, all those sorts of things. Ensuring that everybody has a fair and equal opportunity is something I'm really big on. I don't want to be that auctioneer that someone thinks, oh, you favour a certain portion of the market, or you didn't give us ample time to consider our position. Because at the end of the day, the more comfortable I can make a buyer feel, more than likely the vendor's going to get the best possible outcome. And and we try our best to balance our duty, because the Estate Agents Act obviously empowers us to put the vendor number one. We have to do what is right by the vendor. But I'm also really conscious that auction day is just nervous. Particularly if you're a first home buyer, you've never done it before. I haven't bought at auction yet. I'm sure I will at some point. But I can only imagine how nervous you are if you're about to spend 6, 7, 800,000 on a 2-bedroom unit somewhere in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. Like, surely you wake up in the morning, your stomach's churning.
I went to an auction on Sunday and I saw so many buyers like vaping. Obviously, it's like their nervous system's coming through. Like they're walking, they're pacing, they're on their phone. I feel like it's really obvious to pick a buyer that's going to bid too, just because of how nervous they are. I actually sometimes think it's I know we're a little bit off track, but I sometimes think it's a bad thing if a buyer gets to a property too early on auction day. Like they just work themselves up. Sometimes I think it's better like come just 10 minutes early, so you're not trying to come on the dot. Just come 10 minutes early, walk through the property again, make sure you still want to buy it, and then go out the front. Don't hang around, or you're going to work yourself up. You might faint.
But I also think a good agent can, if the buyer has decided to go alone and not work with the buyer's advocate, I think a good agent can actually help with those auction day nerves. It's if you nurture the buyer throughout the campaign, you get to the week of the auction, you do a really good quality pre-auction call, How are we looking for Saturday? Are there any obstacles in front of you between now and potentially bidding? And you might find out there's something they need assistance with. And just asking a really simple question. We're going to have a few staff there on the day. Do you need some assistance? And that's not to push you, but just, some people aren't comfortable doing public speaking. That's often the most daunting part of the process, is actually having to yell out numbers in front of other people, because it's just something that doesn't come naturally to a lot of people.
Some people don't want the attention.
Correct.
Yeah. And I think you have a good balanced approach of, obviously your vendor's number one, but you're also helping the buyers. And in helping the buyers, you're helping your vendor, like obviously at the same time. Like if you give every buyer every chance to bid, then if they bid, it's only going to result in more really money, for a higher sale price really at the end of the day for your vendor, which is your responsibility. One of the most common questions I get when it comes to auction is like, what's a vendor bid? I think that tends to confuse a lot of people. Like, well, the vendor can't buy it. Like, how does that work? So I'd love to hear from you, like, what is a vendor bid? Why do people vendor bid, or why do you vendor bid? Does it mean the auction's doing well? Does it mean it's not doing well? Should buyers not bid if there's a vendor bid? I'd love to get your sort of thoughts on this. Yeah.
I guess a vendor bid in its most simplest terms, I guess there might be some Gen Z potentially watching this. So back in the 90s, there used to be a tactic called dummy bidding, where agents would pluck bids from, I obviously I hope they can tell that I wasn't working in the 90s, but I've been told that bids were being plucked from trees and cars, or they were encouraging friends and family to come to artificially inflate the price. So the vendor bid was brought in as a legal instrument to essentially cut out that practice. It is essentially a position that the vendor is anything below that figure, we're not looking for offers below that. So we're essentially putting a stake in the ground that if you have interest in the property, you need to be bidding beyond this level. So quite often the vendor bid will be used to start the auction. I'm not an auctioneer that will artificially run the price up with 3 or 4 vendor bids. Like if there's no one there to bid that day, the vendor bid is just a tool to encourage post-auction negotiation, and placing more than one is rarely a good decision in my opinion. That's how I decide to do it. You might have a buyer there that has indicated a level of interest that, well, we do a vendor bid, they bid, we might vendor bid again just to nudge them a little bit closer because we know there's interest. But they're nothing to be feared. It's just a very transparent way to say, well, look, we're not going to consider anything less than this figure. So let's, to help us negotiate a fair outcome from all, we need to be above this level.
When do you use a vendor bid? Is the auction doing well? Is it potentially a bit quiet at the start?
It's generally at the start. So if an auction's got, and I call it, you can turn up, and buyers will probably notice this too. You turn up, there's a nervous tension in the crowd. And you just mentioned that auction on Saturday, people vaping, roaming around. You can feel it in the air.
Like 100 people. When there's going to be a good auction. Coffee cart, that's normally the key indication if you see the coffee van.
I don't. I've got my own opinion on those sorts of. It's really just agent branding. That's all it is. But it's when the auction's going to go well, you generally don't have to place the vendor bid. As an auctioneer, I'll look to start the auction really low and let it grow if we've got interest, because you want everyone to have a fair go. But people are more likely to bid again if they've already bid. And quite often buyers will set a theoretical limit. They won't know what the emotional capacity is until the day. But if the bidding goes beyond that theoretical limit before they've had a chance to bid, they won't bid. So my strategy always, well, let's start it low. But if no one's putting their hand up, everyone's looking at their shoes, which quite often happens, we'll position a vendor bid generally at the bottom of the range to encourage, well, everyone was expecting it at least to be from this price point, so let's move north from there.
Give the buyers a bit of an indication where things need to be.
Correct.
What if there's no other bidding? Like what if you vendor bid, there's no other bidding, even if, let's say you do a second vendor bid, still no bidding, and then obviously people hear this term like pass in. What happens there? Like if it passes in, can buyers still potentially come up after and chat? Like how does that work?
Well, they certainly can. I might go home and cry, but but no. So we had this on Saturday. So you saw the first auction I had that was you'd almost call it a perfect auction, perfect storm.
Good auctioneer.
Great auctioneer.
Great auctioneer.
The great auctioneer couldn't get it done at 3 p.m. in Doncaster East on Saturday. But we had that. So we had a vendor bid place. We actually had 2 people that had been through the property multiple times turn up, but decided not to act on the day. We passed in on a vendor bid. We obviously encourage them to make offers, but at the end of the day, it's up to them whether or not they see value. So the property passes in on that vendor bid. There's no exclusivity for negotiation at that point. So one key thing for buyers to remember is if the property's passed into you on a live bid, but below the reserve price, you have exclusivity to negotiate at the vendor's reserve price. So you get first crack, which is a great position to be in if you really want to buy it, because you never know what conditional interest is sitting outside. So the agent might have someone that couldn't bid on the day because they need finance. That's a condition of their loan. And they're waiting there to see what happens. So if you are there to buy, it's always best to have it passed in on a live bid. But if it's on a vendor bid, there's no exclusivity. We can open up the negotiation to anybody, and then it just goes to phase 2. It becomes a private sale.
Yeah. And I think it's important to also note that it becomes a sort of a private sale hybrid with an auction, because there's 3 business days of sale and conditional period. But yeah, it really becomes a private sale. And then I personally dislike that as someone who's trying to buy a property, because I'm like, I want the transparency. As you said from the start, an auction is the most transparent process. And I would say the average buyer that probably has less experience at buying a property, the auction process is really what you want. Like I see buyers going like, oh, I'll never buy at auction. Like I'll never ever buy. I'm like, well, you're increasing your chances of overpaying. That's how I see it.
Well, this is going to sound really bad coming out of my mouth, but we'll talk. It's actually a really good way to explain it, because it's really simple. I've got a vendor advocate that we do a bit of work with, and he calls anything that's private sale by deceit. Now, I'm not sitting here saying that we lie when we do them at Woodard's, but as a buyer, you have no idea whether what we're saying is true or not. Now, hand on heart, I'll never say that we've got other interest or competing interest if we don't. We're really open and transparent. And we try and add a layer of transparency to the process as often as possible. But there's some agencies that will run a private sale and there is zero transparency and you have no idea.
Put your offer in above this price. Can I have an indication? No. Just give me your best.
Highest and best.
Highest and best. Can I have any understanding? Is there any other interest? Can't tell you. Any other buyers? Can't tell you.
And quite often people view an auction as on the vendor side, well, it doesn't sell, it's a failure. Well, there's no silver bullet. And for a buyer, I think having a fear of an auction, I get it. It's stressful and it would look daunting. And you're making, for most people, the biggest financial transaction you will make, apart from those that go into business and start their own businesses. That's the reality. But to fear auction, it's often misguided, because there might be a family member or a friend that's told them, I'd never buy at auction because of X, Y, Z. We paid too much. But in reality, what if you bought the property without that auction? Because if it was a private sale, you probably wouldn't have gone to that level. And that's where it comes from. The transparency forces buyers to pay more. But on the flip side, it probably guarantees you success if you've got the capability. Because if you speak to buyers, they'll be like, well, before the auction, we were only here, but under that competitive tension, we're actually comfortable going to here because we could see the market.
I like to tell my clients or people that listen to like the TikTok videos or whatever, that auction, you have a higher chance of probably paying more or more of an emotional value, but a private sale, you have a higher chance of overpaying.
Correct.
Because you don't have the transparency. And I always say to clients, I'm always like, if we talk about pre-auction offers or whatever, I'm happy to pay here, but at the level they're wanting to ask, I wouldn't feel comfortable unless I saw someone else paying that. That's how I like to sometimes put it. Like I think a lot of my clients would be prepared to pay more if they could see the market paying more. But it's the whole thing of, am I the only one that sees value in this property? And again, I think that's why auctions are sort of good. You've mentioned a word a couple of times, reserve. Not everyone sort of listening to this would know what reserve means, or on the market, or would know we're not on the market. What's that? Like, what's the legalities around that? Like, do you have to have something signed off from the vendor? Like, I'd love to sort of, obviously, your explanation around that.
So vendors can set a reserve price at whatever level they like. So there's nothing written in legislation that the reserve has to be within the advertised range or within 10% or any of the myths that we hear going around.
Correct. And really common ones, by the way.
Correct. Super common.
People think, like, if you have a property quoted 5 to 550, the vendor could literally set their reserve at 5 billion. Just to use like a crazy example, there is nothing, or they can set it at $1.
Correct.
It's absolutely their decision. But I see these, they shouldn't be allowed to, or they can't. It's like they can.
Yeah.
And they do.
Well, as agents, our role is, when pricing a property, is just to be reasonable.
Yeah.
That's it. So make reasonable assessments on value using comparable properties. So you can't use a 2-bedroom unit to value a 3-bedroom home, because you can get your quote price low enough that you're going to have 1,000 people for the door. That's grubby, and that should just be completely and utterly wiped out because it's not on. But in terms of the reserve price, the owner has complete flexibility. Most owners will take, advice and consultation with their agent. Look, this is where the feedback's coming in. This is where I always term it to owners, we've got competitive tension at this point. So if we're going to have a good auction, we've got 2, 3, 4 buyers at this price point, which tells me they all can't buy it at, let's say, 1.2. So a good position for us to be in to balance not underselling it, but also giving you the best chance to sell is to be at that level with your reserve price. It's always up to you, Dion, where you set it. And that's the minimum price the owner will accept at the auction.
That's your that's your green light. That's
correct.
Where you can say it's on the market. And on the market means it's hit reserve price.
Correct. And there's actually nothing in legislation that actually says the agent has to announce the property on the market. It's actually something that we've come up with as an interest. It's really good because it sets, it gives that clarity and transparency that, hey guys, we're selling the property today. And quite often that's when the auction might enter its second phase where you've just been getting nice, slow, relaxed bidding. But the moment you hit that, and we saw it on Saturday in Clayton, the moment we hit that position, the auction just went to another level. Yep. It was already a good auction, but went to a great auction because it was up for grabs. It's no longer negotiating, bidding to negotiate with the owner. Well, it's bidding to buy now. This is, it's the championship season. Let's go.
It's the best way to put it. Up until reserve is hit, you're bidding for the right to negotiate. And I always say to buyers, if you're bidding, you have to be mindful that at the moment, you're the one that sees the most amount of value, and it's not even on the market yet. So it's not selling to you. So you have to be sort of mindful. But as soon as it goes on the market, then it's like, hey, you have to actually get a bit more aggressive because now you're fighting to actually sign a contract in 5 minutes' time. So it's like a different way to look at things. Another question I get, like vendor bids really common, is like, why don't you just disclose the reserve price? Like, why don't agents tell us? Because you get a lot of buyers that'll come up to you on a Thursday.
I've got a really good answer for this.
Okay.
Yeah. Why don't buyers hand over their pre-approval letters?
Yeah, exactly.
So a buyer's budget is confidential. Sometimes we can work that out through looking at, what else have they inspected and all those sorts of things, but you never know exactly. The reserve price, quite often a vendor won't know exactly what they want until you get to the day of auction. Their goal's to be sold. And if their goal's to be sold, they'll listen to the market and they'll set a reserve price in line with the marketplace. So I actually think you probably do a disservice to vendors if you disclose a reserve price at the start, because it might actually ruin the campaign. If the vendor at the start doesn't quite actually understand where their property sits, but after 10 days on the market, they've got really good quality feedback and they go, yeah, okay, great. That's actually where we need to be to sell it. I just think each part of the transaction's got their own piece of information they keep confidential, and we get to auction day and, if the vendor wants to sell it, you meet the market. If you don't want to sell, that's okay. And quite often vendors that might subconsciously be making the decision not to sell, they will set a high reserve price to create that barrier to transact.
Yeah. And I can say this because I'm not a selling agent, but the reality is probably one of the most effective ways to market your property. Your top of your range is probably where your reserve is going to sit, and you drag your 10% out lower to generate interest and that competition. That tends to be what I find is like the most competitive, or properties that sell the best. Rather than quoting your property really high and setting like a low reserve, you're better off quoting it a little bit lower, having a reserve near the top, and then seeing what the buyers determine the price is. I can say that because I'm not selling properties.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, I like to think we're quite open-minded, and it's just a discussion piece. At the end of the day, our role is to educate and pass on the market feedback. We're just the messenger. So, and this is, I was actually discussing with Desiree, who works alongside me today. It's like buyers that don't return our calls or don't give us the honest feedback. If you flip that on its head and say you're a first home buyer, but in 5 years' time you're trying to sell and you're getting no feedback back from the marketplace or very little, it actually makes it really hard to make decisions. And you quite often create barriers to what could potentially be sales and transactions because the vendor's got no quality information to rely on. And I think the best way to set a reserve price, market feedback. Where are the buyers at?
Yeah.
I don't believe in the buyers are liars that much anymore. Like, yes, some buyers will play the game. And, I've got plenty of stories where everyone was telling us was here and it sold, 300 grand above what they were saying. But for the most part, most buyers are reasonably upfront with where they see value, within a probably 5% variance.
I was going to say, if like a buyer's got a budget of, let's say, $1.50, they're probably going to say, oh, it's maybe sitting around like $9.50 a mil.
Mm-hmm.
But that's for the buyers to determine it at the end of the day if
Correct.
it's on the market at a mil, if they're going to use up to $1.50 to buy.
Correct.
So that's sort of that hard thing where everyone's very mindful about what they say because they don't want it to get used against them, like vendor, buyer. And there's not a whole lot of information to make decisions. I don't know if that's going to change anytime soon, but anyway.
No, it's, as a selling agent, I'm not going to give away all my tricks, but a really good question that we're asking at the moment is, at auction on Saturday, Dion, how much is too much? Because it flips that question.
Yeah.
Because if you ask people, what do you think it's worth? They generally just say within the range.
Yeah.
But when you ask a really good quality question, it can unpack, I guess, where the true value might be to somebody, which then helps you to guide your vendor. But on the flip side, it's also then asking really good quality questions to your vendor to help them understand, well, this is where you need to be. It's a real balancing act that we play, definitely.
It's a good question. What would a buyer do to avoid giving up information on that question?
They usually just dance around it and go, well, that's most of the times the smart ones will sit there and go, oh, I see what you're doing.
Yeah.
That was a good question, but I'm not going to answer it.
Yeah.
Some other people just freely give the information and you're like, well, maybe we should sell before auction to this buyer because they've given us that great quality information, which is fine. But again, even selling before auction, we try and have transparency. I'm a big believer in the transparency gets the best result because buyers then have confidence. And exactly like you said, you can see that the market's there with you, so it's fine.
Yeah. How much is too much? Above your budget. That's a good answer.
Yeah, exactly.
How do you know if an auction's going to fly if on that circumstance? Because I think that's one thing that, as you talk about, like buyers always say these stories. A really common one is like, oh, I've missed out on 5 auctions, 7 auctions, 8 auctions. Again, before we started this podcast, we had a conversation, and I'm a big believer that there should be some sort of responsibility on the buyer. As harsh as this sounds, there should be sort of a responsibility to know what things are worth. Will you get it right every time? Absolutely not. Do I get it right? Do you get it right every time? Absolutely not. But there should be more of a responsibility rather than the quote is what I will rely on. You as a buyer should know what things are worth. But what are some other things that maybe buyers can sort of use as a bit of an indication to know that a property is probably going to push above the range?
I think the biggest telltale sign is the open for inspection busy?
Yeah.
And I'm really upfront with people. Like some agents will water down the campaign to buyers and water it down to the vendors and keep everyone in this state of it's not going well, where I'll quite often say to vendors, I go, look, I get the agreement up front. And we're all adults in this transaction. So I don't want to be the agent that has to water down the feedback to keep everyone, And
they do that so they can get a lower reserve.
Correct.
Just to jump in so the buyers can understand. They do it to get a lower reserve and then to generate more interest because every buyer all of a sudden thinks they have a chance. Yeah.
And I just say to the owner, look, I want to sit down and have really good, honest conversations. And as long as we don't move the goal sticks, we're going to sell.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of what we sell for. Like there's an energy here that tells me we're going to sell. And as long as your expectations are where you're talking about you'd like to roughly be, we don't move that, we'll be fine. But then on the flip side to a buyer, I'm not afraid to tell them, look, Dion, you've been at the open for inspections. You know there's going to be other interest. I'm not going to sit here and tell you the only person that's interested, but I've got genuine sellers. They're listening to the feedback and they want to make sure on auction day they're sold. And that usually gets enough cut through with the buyer for them to go, okay, that's fine. We appreciate that. And there's a bit of, I guess, they're more forthcoming with the genuine feedback because they know that we're not just there, huffing and puffing and fibbing because they've been at the open. They've seen that there was 30 other groups. So that's the number one. Busy open for inspections generally mean you're going to be competing for property. If it's quiet, well, you probably know that the property's positioned too high on price.
I think it is the easiest way. If you don't want to ask any questions, if you don't want to speak to anyone, the open tells you because it tells you how the market's reacted to that property being marketed. A lot of people coming means a lot of people see good value.
Yep.
Not a lot of people coming means there's not a lot of buyers that are willing to take time out of their day to go look at that property. But also, and I know you agree with this, probably the thing we will also add in, unless there's something that's super unique about that property or it's sitting on the power lines or it backs onto the freeway or something like that where buyers wouldn't be aware before they go, that's probably the only thing where you'd be like, oh, maybe the amount of bidders converting won't be as high. But then, even then,
you've got Google. Yeah. I think the day of that is almost dead because Google Maps and everything with Street View now.
Yeah.
The amount of buyers that turn up and make comments, that looks different to what I thought. We didn't even show that. Like, we walked around the area on Google Maps. Like, that's becoming such a big part of the transaction now. But I think it's also sometimes understanding the value in the market's really important, because there are some markets across Melbourne where some agencies with their quote prices really distort the market and they make it quite difficult to transact, that you might turn up to an open home and it's actually priced really accurately.
Yeah.
So it's about doing your research and going, because as an agent, if I pass something in, we've got a really accurate price guide on it. Come Monday, once we've got the asking price, it's within the advertised range, the marketplace notices it and goes, oh, that's not going to get 1.6. They only want, 1.45. We thought because the quote was 1.4 to 1.5, it was definitely going to get 1.6 or more. So I think, like you said, there's a real onus. Understand the market. Any financial transaction, you're not going to the other side of the transaction to get your pertinent information. It's, if you're buying a business, you're not going to go to the business owner and confirm everything he's telling you is true and correct. You're going to get an accountant to look at it, a lawyer to look at it. When you're buying a home, just take half an hour to look through realestate.com.
Yeah.
Have a look, walk through some open homes, do a bit of research before you start looking. And then you've got the power. And if you don't feel comfortable, work with someone like yourself.
I actually think buyers, in a way, probably have more information than vendors and real estate agents, because at the end of the day, they're going through more properties. They're actually physically inspecting things. They're seeing the other buyers. Like, how many times do buyers go, oh, I saw them at another open? All the time. Buyers actually probably have more information. It's just if they're willing to sort of spend 10 minutes even just looking through everything they've looked at, what it sold for, and start to learn that market themselves. Last question before we end part one. How strict is the fall of the hammer? Like, selling, sold.
Yep.
Now, what happens if someone comes up and goes, "Hey, mate, I'll give you a slab of beers and an extra 10,000." How does that work?
I go, regrettably, no, thank you.
Yeah.
So once at the fall of the hammer, it's actually in the rules that we read out at the start of the auction. At the moment, the property is knocked down and declared sold. That's it. There's no late bids or offers accepted. So I've actually got into the habit of I'll fake knock down before I go, because if someone's thinking of waiting for that, almost like a Stephen Bradbury moment to sprint over the finish line at the end and snatch it, if it's there, it'll come out at that point. Like, I'm really conscious of that. But no, waiting to the absolute death knock is never a good strategy, because if we sell it, unfortunately, we can't take any more money. That's it. Legally, it's sold.
Yeah. On Sunday, the other auction I went to, an auctioneer who's very good as well, we both know, he had a bid at the very last moment from a new bidder, came out of nowhere, and it was like selling, and then
we'll give him a shout out. It's Andy Reid. He's got the longest knockdown in history.
And it actually helped him out here massively. Maybe they knew he had a long knockdown. That's why they dragged it out. Yeah. But at the very last second, they're like, wait. And he's sitting there holding the contract and his hands, 20 centimeters apart. And then he got it and then ended up getting another 14 grand or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've been to an auction when I sold real estate, not when I called like years and years ago, where it was sold and then a buyer came up. But you and every good auctioneer gives every buyer a fair chance. And like, there's a process. A lot of people don't know this. There's actually a sort of a formula that every auctioneer sort of follows, which is like trial close. So it's like a quick first, second, third, and then you like resell the property. You'll go and like explain what will happen if no one else bids. You ask all the bidders, and then you do your final call. Like, there's enough opportunity that it really shouldn't happen unless you're purposely, for the sake of, I don't know, drama, waiting until the last moment, which is a really silly strategy in my opinion. I actually think it annoys the other bidders, and then I think they get more emotional because of that, and then they're prepared to pay more because of it.
Yeah, I'm really conscious of that when I'm doing the auction. So I'll always, if I've got one bidder that's taking a really long time with each bid, I'll always go to the person that's bidding really quickly and just let them know that if we were selling your home, this easily diffuses the situation. We would do the exact same thing if we were selling your home. Thank you for your patience.
Yeah.
And that usually calms 9 out of 10 of them. There's always going to be the one that thinks, and it's like, well, we're here to represent the vendor. If this takes an hour or 15 minutes, ideally it doesn't take an hour, but if it does, it does. Our role is to extract the most. And if someone needs a moment within reason, we're going to allow that because it's nerve-wracking. And just because you're super comfortable throwing your bids doesn't mean that this family that might have been looking for 3 months, they keep missing out and they're down to the last $5,000 and it's a big decision.
Yeah.
They need that time, and it's a fair amount of time. It's not anything unreasonable, but a fair amount of time.
And I think if the average buyer turned around to an auctioneer and said, hey, sorry, can you just give me 30 seconds? Pretty sure an auctioneer would be like, no worries, you got 30 seconds. And they'll just, the house is very nice. It's a great location. And you know what I mean? Just run through all the stuff.
Yeah.
But I think buyers sometimes don't realize that they can just communicate and say, hey, can you just give us 2 moments? We're just trying to work this out.
Yeah.
Mate, I feel like there's been a lot of information for everyone. Thank you for joining me this week. And then next week, you're still going to be here. You're not going to be here for a week. But we'll come back next week with part 2. Thank you, mate, for coming on. And we'll catch everyone next week.
Thanks, Dion.